When you hear the words artificial intelligence, many of you might think of the movies The Matrix, or maybe Terminator, or maybe even WALL-E. Hollywood portrays artificial intelligence as a thing that can gain a sentient mind, a conscience, and eventually may cause the disruption, the manipulation, or even the destruction of human society. And I'm here to prove exactly that point. Correction, I'd like to prove that technological advancements in artificial intelligence will eventually disrupt our economy, specifically. Artificial intelligence is described as the theory and development of computer systems that are able to perform tasks that require human intelligence. And I'll be using two specific terms in here. And those terms are synthetic intelligence, or described in Jerry Kaplan's book, Humans Need Not Apply, that necessarily describes machine learning, or things that perceive human intelligence, like visual descriptions or sensory details, and forged labor, which you can imagine would be like a semi-truck or automated robot parts that do one repeated task to fulfill its duty. And the reasons why artificial intelligence will disrupt our economy is because artificial intelligence will, in fact, replace our need for physical labor, will, in fact, replace our need for our minds, and will perhaps see a variety of practical applications that might be used in the future. So in regards for cheap and efficient labor, throughout history, we've seen many different revolutions that have replaced our need for human labor. For example, earliest time, slavery, or even then so, the Industrial Revolution. And in this sort of old automation, machines were continuously used to repeat motions to automate tasks. For example, robots in a automated car factory, or any factory in general. In today's new automation, machines are capable to mimic taught actions through sensors. In 2012, Rethinks Robotics has introduced a robot called Baxter that uses visual sensors to necessarily visualize what it's being taught and mimics that movement. And necessarily, Baxter is known as a general service robot, which is a new current technological advancement happening today that necessarily can replace the common day worker. And this is fairly important because Baxter isn't being programmed to do one specific task. Rather, Baxter has a growing mind, and even though it's not sentient, and it doesn't have its own individualized thought process, it necessarily can produce something a human can. And just like when computers first erupted, computers took up an entire room, and they were also very expensive to create. However, as time progressed, the demand for computers rose, and the cost for computers also decreased. And just as computers followed that trend, we expect robots to also follow that trend. As the demand for automated systems to be increasing, we expect the cost for it to also be decreasing, as well as it performing more efficiently. About its limitations and practical applications, as we see today, self-driving cars isn't something of the future. It's happening right now. As you can hear in the news, Google and many other companies have released self-driving cars into the streets. And necessarily, a lot of people think, oh, yes, we could just use self-driving cars to benefit our own lives. But it's wrong to think of it as such a small scale. A lot of our jobs in our current day lives contain something to do with transportation, whether it's driving a truck or driving transportation, any sort of public bus or train, or even taxi driving, and et cetera, et cetera. And with self-driving car technology, those jobs will be almost obsolete. They will be replaced by a robot, essentially. And even though people may think unions will protect these workers from losing their jobs, that has been proven wrong through history. That throughout these battles between union workers and large corporations tends to win. And unfortunately, it's also a harsh reality to think that even if we do go into a higher education and don't do hard labor for our jobs, that it's a possibility that artificial intelligence will replace our jobs as well. With machine learning, artificial intelligence contains the possibility that necessarily they will be able to learn and they will be able to grow in our minds, that they will replace specialized jobs. We already have systems that can automatically write newsletters, narratives, and a lot of local news stations use this. And that technology is called film. There are also a lot of systems that can create medical, this is a medical consultant for specializing in diseases, and those, one particular technology is called Mycin. And also another new technology that I found kind of cool, which is a robotic kitchen, which necessarily will produce meals just like a professional chef can. And that's a bit scary to think that just by visualizing something, that they can produce something as mimicking a meal. And those are just a few examples of how artificial intelligence can replace something that we believe that humans have the only capability to do so. And I'd like to finish that thought by saying that through the current path that we're going right now, technological advancements in artificial intelligence can potentially harm our economy by harming our employment.
Okay, the things that I think are pretty solid, the proposition is very clearly identified. I think you do a very nice job presenting to the audience. You used your time effectively for the most part. There's a lot of explanation about what it is that you're trying to talk about. There was a preview at the beginning. It's not really broken out as to the number of supporting points. It sounded like there were going to be 3, but I only saw 2. But when I got to the speech itself, that was a little problematic because I did not really pick out the structure as you were talking, and so information had a tendency to run together. Lots of explanations, new theories, hypothetical examples, one follows another, without them necessarily being grouped in a way that makes it easy to process and recall the information. And there aren't distinct claims as a consequence, and so the argument is a little bit less certain than it ought to be. The evidence, I think, is also a little problematic. We've got a couple of examples that you're pointing to. I'm not exactly sure that I'm going to stay up late worrying about Baxter doing general service robotic things. That's a case, that's an example. It's probably a good point to make that this is potentially a threat, but at the moment it seems like it's more a novelty. And I think that that's one of the things that people are going to look at on these things is that you've presented a hypothetical harm down the road, but at the moment it doesn't seem particularly practical. It's like here's the puppet that shows us this kind of thing without it necessarily being the case. And I think there are plenty of examples that you can use to show that this sort of thing is happening. You mentioned automation, for instance, replacing people in a variety of jobs. Well, there's information about those kinds of. We got self-checkout now. You've got the banking systems are all operated on computers, that sort of thing. We're one step away from not having to interact with human beings. We just heard 2 or 3 speeches about social media that talk about that kind of stuff, and that's where artificial intelligence lives. In those kinds of things. It's the Internet of Things that people are going to be worried about someday, and that's where the artificial intelligence is going to replace us. For example, the jobs thing, you mentioned transportation-related jobs. It's not hard to figure out how many people are employed driving trucks. That's the biggest job in the country. That's the job that employs the most people in this country, is truck driver. All right? And that's not a hard piece of information to find, and you don't have it in your speech. And I'm going, well, okay. I mean, I know it, but maybe nobody else knows those sorts of things. And of course, you mentioned other things as well. On the other hand, who's going to need all those trucks if everything's getting delivered to us by drones? We don't have to worry about that. And I don't know. It's just there's a lot of speculation in the speech, and you describe an interesting scenario. Proving it, I think, is the thing where there's some weakness. I think you need some better evidence on those points. All right, thank you.